certain ancestors. People look at, let's say, Australopithecus, and they think of 3.2 million years of evolution or whatever. And it's like, well, we are mammals and we are primates. And so we need to look more at 50, 60 million years of evolution. And that's kind of created what we are. And so one example that I point to often would be that, our smallest ancestors, the little rodent-sized primates that lived primarily in trees, they were hunted by mostly snakes, cats, and birds, all of which hunt by motion. And so the animals that remain motionless in the presence of those animals were selected for and survived. And so there's a conserved response, the freezing response, tonic immobility.
Okay.
Occurs very often. It's conserved across a lot of mammalia, certainly all primates and apes. And so one of the things that you see very often that people believe about Sasquatches is that they somehow have the power to incapacitate you. Whether that's through some people, it was previously thought to be like some sort of spiritual energy, or then thought to be like telepathy. And now they've couched that under the idea of infrasound, because infrasound is a real natural phenomenon. They use that as like an explanatory mechanism to describe the same effect. I think that sounds more kind of sciencey, and so people couch it under that. But it's like, well, what's really occurring here is that you have this involuntary response. It's involuntary. You can't power it. And you look into the histories again of bears, tigers, and gorillas, all of which across multiple cultures and context thought that they had the ability to incapacitate a person with their gaze, that they could see you, that they could freeze you like stone, something of that nature. And so that's another example of like, well, you should expect people to experience that.
Yeah.
And based on the histories of these other animals, you should expect people to put the onus on the animal, because they don't understand that, like, no, this is a normative response within you that you're powerless to. Because again, if we're talking about millions of years of being prey animals, I mean, the mechanisms that selected for that, these involuntary automated mechanisms, like, they're way more sophisticated and selected for than your rational mind, than your reasoning.
It's like a bypass of your brain. It's a trip switch.
Certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have this sort of newer portion of our brain, like, that creates reasoned thinking, rationality. We have, these abstract representations of potential motor outputs, on and on and on. But like, that's, much less sophisticated than this older host of biological responses, neurological responses. And so it's no wonder that people thought that this animal could do something to you that you were powerless against. And it's those very things that very often people say, oh, well, this witness described being paralyzed by a Sasquatch at a distance. Hogwash, throw it out. And it's like, no, they're describing something that was experientially accurate or phenomenologically accurate. They just don't understand the mechanism. And so we should offer like more charitable takes. And so we just in general, like, interpreting testimonies is so difficult for that reason, because there's so many different factors that go into that. And it's easy to dismiss a lot of those things when they don't necessarily align with our presuppositions.
Oh, it's completely personal. It's completely subjective all the way.
Absolutely.
And I've noticed that with people. I got very interested for quite a long while in the psychosocial aspects of the genre, especially from a religious point of view, having somebody sort of with a religious background who married somebody from a different religious background, and observing the different way that we would both interpret the same event was very interesting to me, because we both had a religious slant that would go in a slightly different direction, not too different, but it was very clear to me that we experienced the same thing, and yet the interpretation was different. And that kind of made me kind of curious for a while. Applying it to this genre, I've met people who are completely on the paranormal side who say, no, because we can't find it, it must go into a portal, it must evaporate, it must have the ability to cloak. And my view on that personally, from a sort of a flesh and blood point of view, is, well, yes, but an animal that lives in the forest knows the forest as well as you know your neighborhood, and you know all the little ducks and the hides, the places where you can be out of sight. And that's also probably why it's very difficult to track them, because I thought